Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you everyone for staying with us. I'm going to talk about how we use big data with Psychometrics together to try and build personalization and psychological understanding into some of the AI endeavors that we've heard about already. So a quick introduction to the Psychometrics Center. We're part of the University of Cambridge. We were founded about 30 years ago, specializing in development of psychometric tests, such as personality tests or intelligence tests, and probably from around 2007 onwards, we've, I think, led the field, certainly in the academic sphere, of applying those techniques to online data, particularly to social media data. So if you think about it as a psychologist, if you wanted to know whether someone was extroverted or introverted, then traditionally you might invite them into the lab, ask them questions like, do you talk to a lot of different people at parties, or how many friends do you think you made this year, and so on. When actually nowadays most of the questions you would like to know the answer to have already been answered in some way in the digital environment. So rather than asking someone whether they go to parties, you might ask them to share their event history for the last 10 years on Facebook. Just an example of that. So we use that data to do psychological prediction, psychological understanding. My talk is really in two parts. So first of all, I'll tell you about the research that's done by my group and our collaborators, and then I'll show you some implementations of this, particularly by startups. So as I said, the research for us really started in 2007 with the creation of a Facebook application called My Personality. Now what this did was take psychometric tests that have been used in research for decades and put them on Facebook for people to use completely for free. And this was very disruptive, and still is actually, because you normally have to pay to get your results when you do one of these tests. They can be very expensive, and when you go to a job assessment center, for example, if you don't get the job, you often don't find out what your results were. So this was completely free. We asked people to take the test, and then after receiving their results, we asked them to opt in to share their data with us. And what was innovative about it was that they could not only share their personality test scores, or the psychological test scores, they could also, via the Facebook Graph API, share records of actual behavior going back, to the moment that they created their Facebook account. So this resulted in a database of over 6 million opt-in social media and psychological profiles, allowing us to do interesting kind of machine learning experiments using the two. So trying to predict psychology from what you do online. We showed in March of 2013 that it was possible to predict a range of very, very sensitive attributes just from what you like on Facebook. So just the pages that you like. Now page likes wasn't the only thing that we had access to from people who volunteered their data with us, but it proved to be one of the most convenient digital footprints for doing psychological assessment. Then 2 years later, we showed that some of these models using likes can actually surpass humans at predicting personality. And if you think that prediction of personality is something we have all evolved to be really good at, because we need to know, who to be friends with, who to work with, who to collaborate, who to mistrust, and so on. It's very, very surprising. So these are some of the traits that we can accurately predict from your digital footprint, and you can all try this for yourselves. So Big Five personality is a big one, which has been used by psychologists for decades and is related to many other external outcomes, such as consumer behavior or workplace behaviors, intelligence and happiness, life satisfaction. Also, more subtle things like whether your parents were together when you were 21, or your sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, and age. All very easy to predict given a sufficient footprint. So in January 2015, we compared the database of cross ratings where people shared their scores with their friends and family to the computer model to see actually how good are computers relative to humans. And what we found was very surprising, that with only 10 of your Facebook likes, the computer model surpassed the prediction of the ground truth psychological score of people's colleagues. So if you think about 360-degree feedback, which is still very widely used in HR, we were finding we could surpass that with actually a very, very small, subtle footprint. With 70 likes, the model was better than people's friends. And again, the reason we can compare this is because we had volunteers taking 100 or 336 question personality tests and then sharing that with their friends. So you'd have a big database of friends and family and loved ones rating each other's personalities. So just to kind of close this theme off, with about 300 likes, the computer model is more accurate at predicting your personality than your husbands or wives. So one of the captions for this actually was that the computer knows you better than your mum. So our belief is that if this is the case, and this is using only one digital footprint, of course you could use lots of different signals, then we should use this technology to better personalize experiences and give people control of their personal data. So this is another example actually using text. So like I said, people could share lots of different things through the Graph API, and one of those was status updates. So we found that the different language that you use also contains psychological information. Now that can be very subtle and it can be quite a weak signal, but of course if you have access to a very large digitized record of behavior, then putting all of those things together, the algorithm can quite easily generate these predictions. And as academics, we always have to compare ourselves to the ground truth. So all of this data is open sourced for academic research, and that's resulted in 45 peer-reviewed publications in the last 5 years. As I said, you can try this for yourself. So at applyMagicSource.com, we put this technology into an API to encourage people to engage with their own data online and see how they might be perceived, whether by companies or whether by their friends or even governments in future, perhaps. So you can connect your Facebook, connect your Twitter, and find out what that behavior says about your personality or your intelligence or your life satisfaction.
Did you test it for yourself?
Of course, yes. There's my prediction. So I've fiddled it a lot over the years. So of course, an aspect of this is that once you understand what your behavior says about you online, you can change how you are perceived by others. So that's quite a powerful thing, and we think that's a power that should be held individually by citizens rather than kind of a top-down approach. So this is my predicted personality from Facebook likes. Give it a try and you'll get the idea. So you've probably picked up by now that you can also reverse the assessment process and use it for targeting. So if I know that you like these things, then my computer model would predict that you're probably of higher IQ. Now some of these are of course just correlations that come out in the model. Some of them are obvious, like you might expect smarter people to be more interested in Mozart and science, but you might not know that they're also more likely to like Morgan Freeman's voice, or walking on crunchy leaves, and thunderstorms, and these kind of spurious things. And of course, you can target all kinds of different groups. So this is very, very powerful in terms of trying to hack the auction systems of online advertising. Because if you're a brand that wants to speak to extroverted people, then all of the other brands you compete with are also bidding on, skydiving and nightclubs and all the people that like those things, that have those interests. But maybe they're not bidding on less obvious, but just as strongly correlated keywords. So it's quite a powerful tool when you reverse the assessment and use it for targeting. And it means you can actually put messages in front of the people most likely to engage with it from a psychological perspective. So here are some implementations of how this research has been put into practice. So we've done some work with Hilton over the last few years. It started quite slowly, just trying to understand their existing online audience, and eventually has kind of matured more into a customer engagement and a brand awareness collaboration. So I worked on the project called the Holiday Matchmaker, which was an app we created with Hilton about 1.5 years ago. What it did was use our API to predict your traveler type from your Facebook likes. So traveler type to Hilton means, whether you're a deliberator, so you like to plan and make an itinerary, or whether you're an all-includer, so you like comfort and spa experiences and luxury and so on. And underlying that is our personality prediction. So we can say, actually, this is likely to be the big 5 score of the individual. And what it lets you do is tailor the way that you interact with customers at the kind of in the digital space. So you would log in, get some feedback, which is engaging and also scientifically kind of robust. And we'd also present psychologically tailored images and language. So I showed you that people of different personalities use different language. So you can change the way you communicate with people to better suit them. Of course, people should always know that you are doing that. And that's the distinction between our approach and maybe that of others who are trying to do this. So we'd use this in practice, in campaigns. We were interested of whether this would have any impact in the online advertising space. We found that it did have huge improvements on click-through rates and social engagement, which is what we were trying to optimize. And the app also resulted in quite good metrics and improvements on travel industry benchmarks at the time. So we knew this had potential, but we also knew we had to check whether it would have a real impact on the revenues. So here's another example, a validation study checking on the extroversion scale. So I know nothing about selling makeup, of course, but I know that extroverts and introverts are different. So tailoring the image and language to these groups, and then delivering the targeted message to the relevant group was actually twice as profitable as not personality optimizing the advertising. So it was interesting for us to see that there was no real strong effect on click-through rates, but there was a very, very strong effect on return on investment, partially because we're also hacking the kind of traditional artificially inflated prices of online ad inventory. So another implementation, this is from a startup in London we collaborated with on an Innovate UK funded project. They're called CitizenMe, and they're disrupting the market research space by having citizens pull all of their data into a centralized secure hub on their mobile phone, and then share that securely without compromising on their anonymity with brands. So what it means is you can pull in your Facebook, your Twitter, your health records, even text that you write on the phone, and get insight on that, whether from our own team or from other universities and other providers. And then you have quite a simple trade. So, would you like to share your latest tweets and answer 2 questions for £2? And you kind of create a user-centric data model for market research. And it means on the other side that organizations and brands can say, show my questions, show my survey to people who are extroverted, liberal and artistic, of such and such intelligence, life satisfaction, and you get that targeting level in a very, very secure way. Chemistry is not quite a startup, but it's kind of this was a more research-oriented project, trying to use some of this technology to create a more personalized portal for HR. So this was a project we did with SAP, where people could log into a Facebook app called PerfectMatch and get feedback on their personality, and then it would recommend them a different job at SAP that would match their profile. So this digital data wasn't used in the recruitment decision. So we weren't saying, you don't get this job because you have too many pictures of yourself drinking on Facebook, but it did provide a way to engage with existing content that SAP already had. And as you can imagine, with such a big organization, there are many different roles in different areas. So this is a little bit what it looked like. So I get some feedback on myself, and it matches me to a job, and then I go through the kind of standard recruitment process. So you can really personalize the experience and do it very quickly. So prediction happens in about 40 milliseconds. The last example I'll share with you is something called Data Selfie. This is a browser plugin. We worked with DataX, who are based in New York. And what it lets you do is basically record your usage of Facebook. So it's a Chrome plugin at the moment, Firefox coming soon, and it tracks everything that you type, everything that you look at, and then kind of maps it out for you. So it's a little bit like getting your data back from Facebook, trying to reverse engineer the newsfeed and so on. And this is data you can then export and share with people and do your own analytics on. This was quite an interesting application for us, because what they did is they, rather than getting the Graph API connection of saying these are the things that you like and this is your personality, they can see, okay, you looked at this page for 25 seconds, and then they'll use that as an input, or this is the language that you used when writing to your friends, and they generate a personality prediction using our API and give you feedback actually in Facebook experience, which I think is very disruptive and very, very powerful to give people back control of their data. So I've rushed through very, very quickly, so do ask any questions, but applying psychometric techniques to big social data allows you to do really, really powerful things. So sitting as a layer on top of the existing demographic and interest-based audience intelligence, we think it can be very, very powerful for personalization. So you can understand the psychological makeup of your audience. You can personalize products, image, language, and communication down to the individual level. You can respond in real time, so people can interact with the content in more personalized ways. You can be transparent and explain how the predictive model is working, because it's no longer a black box where, dimension 47 is actually extroversion. You can tell people that, we believe you are this extroverted, maybe you want to correct that prediction and get a new recommendation. You can ask fewer questions or none at all. You can create a dialogue around that content, differentiate from competitors in personalization, use data you might not have thought to use before in this way, and overcome cold start problems. So if you're a grocery company, you might be amazing at predicting what groceries people are going to buy, but now imagine you want to launch a music service. How can you use your knowledge of grocery data to go into music? And the answer is you can use psychology as a bridge between those two domains. So you can predict psychology from music listening or from grocery or from Facebook likes or language use, and not have to collect a lot of new training data to develop that new model. And we think this creates for better, more engaged communities. And we had GDPR mentioned earlier. So I think the transparency angle of this is also very, very powerful. So thank you very much.
Well, it's quite impressive and fighting on the same. Just a quick question first on the way you enrich your model today. So it's the reason why you're working with all these different corporations and all these different business cases is to enrich the model, because you're coming from an academic standpoint. I mean, you're not going revenue from what you doing here. It's what's the challenge for you? It's to enrich the model and be better.
Yeah, I think we enrich the model in two ways. So we continue to put tests online and create demos for people to understand their data. But we also, the reason we build APIs is because we want this to be used in practice. So we don't just want it to be something that students use. We of course want, hospitality to be more personalized. We want to, if we book something online, we want to be understood then in the offline enjoyment of that experience. So it happens on two sides.
So what that means with this API is everybody here in this room can use your API and use your data and prediction and whatever to enrich their model. That's the way it works today, or? Yeah.
So we don't share any of the training data itself, but the API works in that it receives a digital footprint from the customer, which they need to demonstrate they have the consent of the individual to submit. So if you're a company, you need to prove that you have explained to your customers what's happening with their data. And then we send back just the prediction in a JSON. So none of that is stored by us, really. So your data remains secure and your existing user agreements are kind of not compromised.
And how many different external partners are using your solution today?
So maybe 10 or 15, kind of more seriously. Okay. So we commit to keeping an up-to-date list of everyone that's using our technology, which is actually something I encourage more data science providers to do. The reason being that when people hear, personality prediction, Cambridge, Facebook in the news, we want to make sure they know when we're doing it and when someone else is doing it using similar name. So.
And do you have competitor in the academic space? I mean, some other universities or research labs working on the same thing.
Yes.
And
so we open source the data, actually. So there are academics from over 80 universities around the world using our data and publishing. So that's not really competition from our point of view, it's collaboration. But I guess that's a good way to stave off competition, is actually make all of your stuff available and see what people do with it.
Okay, question? I think there's some question over there, yeah.
Well, I'm not a political expert, but I have been to a couple kind of conferences about political polling, and I think there's definitely a consensus within the pollster industry that, you know, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So a lot of the unpredictable events that have happened in the last few years in the political space have been due to the poor quality of the data going in. So populism, kind of populistic voting might be an example of that, where if you ask people, are they going to vote for an extreme right-wing party, they're embarrassed to tell you the truth. And no amount of methodological innovation will make that data any better than it is. So I think there is potential to use alternative data sources, whether that is social networks or kind of more qualitative approaches and this kind of thing. I think the market research industry and political research industry should try to do that and diversify certainly.
Laurent? Yeah.
Just a feedback, I just ran the test, and I'm 27 according to your...
Congratulations.
Thank you, makes me much older than I am.
Fantastic, yeah. So you can even see which aspects of your footprint are making you appear that way to others, right?
Any other question? Okay, so what's your next challenge after? I mean, in academic, I mean, in research, what are you working on right now?
More and more image analysis. So we're also doing research on prediction of psychological traits from images, and social media platforms are great for getting access to large samples of images. So you might imagine that extroverted people might take more might take more photos in bars or, you know, outside. Or conscientious people might take more photos while they're running and this kind of thing. So if people, and there are many people, millions of people that have chosen to share their social media data with us, including images and profile photos. So that will be, I think, a growing area of research. It's a little bit more computationally challenging, so that's something we need to work out with kind of getting software engineers and collaborating more with technical people rather than just psychologists or computer science.
And you're doing the same also on the video, I mean, on audio recognition. I mean, you can recognize, analyze the audio also? You do that?
I think the route, because we're quite a small team, the route to that is probably partnering with good third-party API providers. So, you know, there are great people out there doing transcription, you know, of audio to text, and then we could run text models on it. So I'd say we very much rely on being, you know, in that ecosystem of third-party providers, although we would be very selective about which providers we can work with from a data security standpoint. So we don't really want to work with people who will claim ownership of the individual's data that is sent. So that can be tricky.
Any question? So just the last one, maybe on UK, since you're coming from Cambridge and UK, what's the ecosystem over there around AI and machine learning? I mean, what's the dynamics over there?
Well, it's very vibrant, and the rush for data science skills is obviously, you know, true, I think, all over Europe and the US. One thing I would say is that there are very few data science teams that have psychologists in them. So I've been to a lot of, you know, training sessions and conferences and so on, and there are huge data science teams made up just of, you know, people who have studied astrophysics and then retrained in 2 months, and then they start working with customer data. And depending on the organization, that can be quite problematic, because those people come from disciplines with very different ethical training, and when you're dealing with human subjects research and customer data, it's very important to have that. So I think there's and actually it falls on universities really, that there's a skills gap that universities have created or kind of are struggling to fill. So we very much believe in using psychology and social sciences together with more of the computer science and actuarial prediction methods. So it's as true that psychologists don't really know how to code, and a lot of coders don't kind of engage as often in psychological discussion or historical discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Vesselin.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Thanks again.